Hello. So, I I was meant to have football training tonight, and I got ready and everything. So I'm all with my kit, and then I've realised they cancelled it. Like I wouldn't mind it because I was doing work anyway, but I don't know. It's just because I got ready. And it's sort of annoying, but and it would have been cool to like run around a little bit, I guess. Anyway, I've been trying to get my head around this Ludwig Wittgenstein guy and language games, and I know I made a video about him yesterday, or attempted to, and he's extremely confusing. So I'm gonna try and read. I'm just gonna read through this booklet and try and interpret parts of it, because like in some parts I felt like okay, I get that, but it's like I just it couldn't click. Like I couldn't like try and explain it in another way. And I think it was Wittgenstein who actually said that no one could understand him. If you thought you understood him, you're wrong. And I feel like he's right. Like I don't know how like we're learning about a guy who reckoned he couldn't be understood, and we're gonna be expected to write an essay about this, perhaps. Um. So how do you write an essay about someone who said that you can't understand what they're trying to say? Um. Okay. Right. I'm just gonna read through the booklet and then make points where I can, where it's possible. Wittgenstein's ideas about language as a game struck him while he was watching a football match. Okay, so what do we mean by a game? And here I've wrote, a game is something we willingly subject ourselves to in the hopes of winning or doing our best. And, okay, so the winning and doing our best probably links to my own competitive roots, like, because I'm quite a competitive person, so if I'm going to do something, I want to do my best in it, or I want to win, whether that means beating other people or beating what I did last time. Okay, so there's that, and but there's more to a game. There's rules, there's other things like that, but I think that comes up in a bit. That probably comes up here actually. Okay, so examples of a game is football, chess, language according to Wittgenstein, and I don't know, drafts. Okay, Wittgenstein used the metaphor of a game to warn people against defining the meanings of words too precisely. Wittgenstein used the word game to describe language because he thought that the meaning of language was relative to the culture. The broader the culture is, the less informative the language. Okay, use the word game to describe language. Okay, so if we look at what a game consists of, it's got rules. Language has rules. What else has it got? It's got a social element, like games, but it's also got an individual element, like games. Use the word game to describe language because he thought that the meaning of language was relative to the culture. So different cultures have different language games. But okay, so the broader the culture, so the larger the culture, the less informative the language. So this is because there's more room for different games to be played within a large culture, which means the language is less informative. You can't pin it down as much. Like, I guess you could imagine this: if you've got a group of 5 people compared to if you've got a group of 100 people, it's got to be more likely that the 5 people are able to settle for a language game than the 100 people who are gonna probably segregate themselves and settle for multiple language games within that culture. So the broader the culture, the less informative the language. So the bigger culture you have, the harder it becomes to pin down the meaning to words. I guess that's what that means. Right. Okay. So. Okay, and Wittgenstein used the metaphors of a game to warn people against defining words too precisely. So that fits with what I've just said there about broader cultures having, or when a culture is broader, it's harder to pin down the word of the meaning of a word because there's more language games in which that word is associated with, so the meaning of the word becomes more ambiguous because the meaning isn't necessarily intrinsic to the word itself. It's contingent on the individual experience of the word, if that makes sense, and also group experience of the word. But the group experience of the word is dependent on individual meanings of the word. Without an individual, there is no group. So I guess you can take this all down to an individual level of how the individual sees language. I'm not quite sure about that, so I'm going to read that one again. Wittgenstein used the metaphor of a game. So metaphor, so it's not actually a game. Language isn't actually a game, but he compares it to a game, or says, he compares it to a game in a way, to warn people against defining the meanings of words too precisely. So we can't apply the rules of one language game to the rules of another because of ambiguity within the different games of language. Okay, Wittgenstein used the word game to describe language because he thought the meaning of language was relative to the culture. So the meaning that we assign to words is relative to the culture that we live in. It's dependent on that. There's not necessarily a universal label for a word or a universal definition for a word that is dependent on the culture. And I know that in Germany they have a lot of words that can't necessarily be accurately translated into English, I mean. So I guess that could support that idea. Okay, Wittgenstein left philosophy for a while, but he was persuaded to return to it and to Cambridge in the 1920s. He became very critical of his earlier views and shifted to a more tolerant, pluralistic account. After his death, philosophical Investigations was compiled by Elizabeth Anscombe from the notes in German which Wittgenstein left. Anscombe had kept these notes in a biscuit tin. This book and Wittgenstein's students exerted enormous influence on the philosophy of religious language. It was Wittgenstein's later work which was most influential. So there's some biographical information, I guess, and the distinction between Wittgenstein's earlier work, which was quite scientific, and I think he used to be associated with the Vienna Circle and logical positivism, but he sort of moved further away from that in his later life and saw language as something a little bit more. He recognised the ambiguity in language and saw that it was important to be maintained and that we shouldn't try and pin down the meanings of words. And I think that earlier Wittgenstein said something like it was something along the lines of anything worth saying can be said clearly, but he sort of changes his mind about that. Okay, it says here the shift was from whether language refers to the way it refers. So at first early Wittgenstein, I guess, was saying whether language refers. So what does that mean exactly? Does that mean refers to the outside world? Refers to some specific meaning? Refers to something that exists? Or so is this doubting the validity of language compared to accepting that language has a validity or has meaning, but it's just looking at how it refers to things in the world? I'm struggling to get my head around this. The shift was from whether language refers to the way it refers. So that suggests that at first he had some doubt about whether language actually refers to things. But then he sort of accepted that it does refer to things, but it's just the way in which it refers. Okay. So in order to determine the meaning of a word, it is best to see how it is actually used rather than trying arbitrarily and theoretically to come up with a definition. Back to the rough ground, that's what Wittgenstein said. The traditional view of language had been given by Augustine. The individual words in language name objects. Sentences are combinations of such names. Every word has a meaning. It stands for something. Okay, so the individual words in language name objects. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case, because don't some words name subjects or different of things which aren't necessarily objects? But so what's an object? An object I see as something which exists in the world almost tangibly. Like, I wouldn't say that something that exists metaphysically or an idea or a concept is an object, yet we still have words which refer to these things. So the individual words in language name objects. I wouldn't say that was necessarily the case. Sentences are combinations of such names. Okay, every word has a meaning. It stands for something. So every word does have a meaning, and every word does stand for something. Like, when I'm talking, all of the different words are formulated to make a coherent sentence. So every word seems to have a meaning, but I would have to reject Augustine's claim that words in language name objects, because it depends on how you define objects, but I would say that an object is something which exists outside of myself, something I can hold, something that occupies space, but I think there's a lot of words that we use, like I, for example. I could refer to the self, but is the self just the material body I have? Or you could say the. Well, I can really think about this. Like, I feel like I should know more about language. The. Like, what exactly is the? Because I know that it's a word that goes before an object, or it goes the cat, the dog. This is okay. So I don't know how much time I should spend thinking about this. The individual words in the language name objects. Okay, I'm just gonna say they don't for the sake of my own mind, but I don't think that all individual words in language do name objects. I don't think he's distinguished between the different types of words, which means I can't necessarily look at this statement ambiguously. It's so weird because I'm trying to figure out language with language, and I think Wittgenstein actually said that was impossible. You can't figure out the way language is used by using language, but that's what Wittgenstein tried to do, I think, in his earlier book, and that's why he changed his mind and he started to detest his work to where he becomes known as later Wittgenstein, and he decided you couldn't formulate a theory around this thing. He described his work as more like a ladder, reaching up to something. But yeah, you can never actually get there, and I'm experiencing that right now, trying to explain language with language, and I'm really struggling. Okay, Wittgenstein himself had accepted this view, but he came to see that context is needed, as well as the actual words themselves. It is the practice which gives a word meaning. Okay, so that makes sense. Context is needed as well as the actual words themselves. So this goes back to what I was saying before about you can't necessarily pin a word down to a specific definition, because that the definition of that word might change based on the context that the word is used in, and or you could say that the context is the language game, or the context is part of the language game. I don't know, because each situation has a different language game. Perhaps how transient are language games exactly? Do they change on a daily basis? Do they change within the subject of that specific language game? And how rapidly, if they do? I don't know. Wittgenstein himself had accepted this view, but he came to see that context is needed as well as the actual words themselves. So he says words are necessary, but context is also necessary. It is the practice which gives words meaning. So it is the context in which you are using these words that actually gives the word itself meaning. Oh, so if you use a word outside of any specific language game whatsoever, that word doesn't have any meaning whatsoever, because it's just a word. It's almost like by embedding a word into a sentence, or by embedding a word into a specific context, gives that word meaning. Otherwise, you could interpret that word in any sort of way, but you can't interpret that word without playing a language game. So if you try to assign a definition to a word outside of any specific context, you have to put that word into context in order to be able to formulate a definition. I think that's what he means by that. Okay, he suggested that we put cramps or limits on words by wrenching them out of their use. We must solve this problem by showing the fly the way out of the bottle. He maintained philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday, so philosophy should not prescribe but describe use. What do you think this means? Okay, so he wrote, language is dependent on context. We can't just look at a set definition. Okay, and when we use words to mean different things. Okay, and that's linked to philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday. Showing the fly the way out of the bottle. I've explained before. It's important not to trap a word in a set meaning. Okay, so he suggested that we put cramps on words. We put limits on words by wrenching them out of their living use. Okay, so right. So the living use is the context. It's the language game that we play. It's the use of it's the practice of the word by using it in a sentence or within a specific language game. But we put a cramp or a limit on a word by trying to define a word as if the word is somehow separate to the language game, as if the word exists intrinsically on its own, which in some ways it does, but it doesn't have a specific definition until it's put into a context. Okay, so that makes sense. We must solve the problem by showing the fly the way out of the bottle. He maintained philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday. So we can look at the word goes on holiday. We could interpret this as in literally goes on holiday, as in you go to another country, they speak a completely different language to you, and you speak, let's say you speak English, they speak French. There's obviously going to be problems there, but I like to think of this in more like when language goes on holiday, when language goes out of context, or when language goes into another context. So does this mean like taking, like let's say you have a definition of a word based on your language game, based on a game that you play on a regular basis, and you try and bring that word into the context of another sentence where it might not completely fit, and then a philosophical problem will arise. So what does it mean by a philosophical problem? He maintained philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday. So philosophy should not prescribe but describe use. Okay, so prescribe but describe. Okay, so prescribe means okay, I've never even thought about the meaning of this word. It means assign or give something a use. Okay, so you shouldn't assign meaning to words. You should describe the use of a word. So I guess this goes back to you shouldn't prescribe a specific definition to a word, but you should describe the use of what you should describe the meaning of the word in the context that it's being used in. So I guess that's what that means by philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday. Language goes on holiday suggests that the word has been assigned to a specific context or a specific language game. So it's almost got set to the definition of that specific language game, right? So when the language then goes on holiday, when it goes somewhere that when it's had that cramp put on it, when it's been limited to a specific language game, and it goes on holiday, the problems arise because we're still stuck on the definition of that same of the old language game, of the word within the context of the old language game. So is he saying that we perhaps have to loosen up our definitions, that we have to leave room for the fact that language is ambiguous and can be used in different contexts? and will be used in different contexts. I feel like that's what it's saying. I'm 20 minutes in and I'm only through the first page. This is extremely complex. Like, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time revising this. Okay, I've got like 20 minutes of recording time left, and it'll probably cut out sometime before then, and I've still got like a lot of pages to go through, so I might just cut this out here and then go into a part 2, because, yeah, if I'm spending this much time on one page, then, yeah. So, what can I take from this? We can't simplify language, we can't pin language down to a specific definition, we sort of have to, accept that language is used in, that language should be described based on the context it's used in, and not prescribe a specific definition to single words, because the single word is contingent on the context. That single word doesn't have a meaning until it has been used within a specific language game or within a specific context. Okay, right. Thanks for watching. I'll make a part 2, probably part 3, and probably a part 4 on this topic, because it's really complicated and I need to learn it all. Okay, thanks for watching.